Welcome to Love Renee Podcast. I am Renee, and you are here for episode 3. It's the place you want to be. What if I rhymed every single time? That wouldn't be good, and people would unsubscribe. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the new year, New Year's resolutions, and my thoughts on that. We'll hear a poem from Muriel Rukeyser. It's a beautiful piece that blends both the idea of new beginnings and also some of the things that are taking place on the world stage right now. So you want to make sure to listen to that. And then, as always, at the very end, we'll hear from you. I have a question from someone that I'll be speaking to and sharing about, and so you'll want to stay tuned all the way to the end. As always, if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to email me at loverenapodcast@gmail.com. That's loverenapodcast@gmail.com. But before we get into any of those things, first, a song for the new year. One of my favorite New Year songs by one of my favorite bands, Sleeping at Last, January White. Sleeping at Last has been one of my favorite bands for a long time, since I first saw them open for like Yellow Card and Something Corporate. Those words mean nothing to you. Don't worry. You'll still love hearing from Sleeping at Last. Check them out on Spotify. Go and buy their work and show them some love. For now, let's dive in. It's the time of year when we are relentlessly optimistic. Ryan O'Neal, also known as Sleeping at Last, wrote and sings in the song January White that you just heard. This year is a sealed envelope, a culmination of hopes, the lottery result that we've been crossing fingers for. Most of the year, it seems that we look back at the past with those rose-colored glasses. This isn't a modern phenomenon for us. The Romans called it memoria praeteritorum bonorum. I knew those years of Latin would come in handy. It literally translated, it means, the past is always well remembered. Everything was better back when, fill in the blank for you. If only we could get back to that time when all was well, as if there ever was a time when all was well. Researchers tell us that it's a kind of cognitive bias, an approach that the brain uses to guard our well-being or our self-esteem. For example, when I think about my childhood, I remember riding my bike around the neighborhood with friends. I remember playing with Barbies around the big tree off our back deck. I don't tend to think on and on about the endless hours of sitting in the timeout chair or summer boredom or getting my mouth washed out with soap because I lied to my parents as often as I breathed and they were left with really no option, and it worked out so well that I now have a ridiculous sense of integrity that sometimes feels like a curse rather than a virtue. It's probably just me, though. Sometimes rosy retrospection is grounded in real events, but other times it's our memory playing little tricks on us. The implication of it is that the present isn't all that great. For life to be better back then, it must not be all that great now. Things have gotten worse, we think. We're going downhill, on and on. But this time of year we are wonderfully optimistic. A lot is said about the lack of resolution follow-through. Not many of us stick to our plans in January, but I think that misses the point. While we may look at our resolution tendencies and see our inability to change or the gravity of being human, I see the hope written into our DNA. That part of us that can't help but imagine the possibility. It's as if, for a little time each year, we take off our rose-colored glasses, turn away from the past, toward the future. And as Ryan puts it in the song, the future is brighter than any flashback. I hope that's true. Love, Renee. An excerpt from Elegy and Joy by Muriel Rukeyser, both poet and activist. We tell beginnings for the flesh and the answer, or the look, the lake in the eye that knows, for the despair that flows down in widest rivers, cloud of home, and also the green tree of grace, all in the leaf, in the love that gives us ourselves. The word of nourishment passes through the women, soldiers and orchards, rooted in constellations, white towers, eyes of children, saying in time of war, what shall we feed? I cannot say the end. Nourish beginnings. Let us nourish beginnings. Not all things are blessed, but the seeds of all things are blessed. The blessing is in the seed. This moment, this seed, this wave of the sea, this look, this instant of love. Years over wars and an imagining of peace, or the expiation journey toward peace, which is many wishes flaming together, fierce, pure life, the many living home. Love that gives us ourselves in the world known to all, new techniques for the healing of the wound and the unknown world. One life, or the faring stars. Now it's time to hear from you. As always, feel free to be in touch with me via email at loverenapodcast@gmail.com. And today I have a question that regards our last episode. The question is this: how does a person know they are growing eyes? Now, if you missed the last episode when I explained what growing eyes means, take a second and go back and listen to it, because it'll give you some context for my response. It's not a long episode, and then you can kind of continue on with this episode. So go back to episode 2 so that you can kind of understand this question here in episode 3. This question, how does a person know they are growing eyes? It represents that part of us that wants to know what's going on. You know, the proof part of us. Prove to me there's something bigger going on behind the scenes. Prove to me there is meaning. Or maybe the wanting to be God part of us. The wanting to see it all. The wanting to know it all. What is going on is the biggest question there is. I feel woefully unprepared to answer that conclusively, but the image of a baby growing eyes in the womb is powerful because it highlights the mystery and the not knowing. It's poignant in that way. For me, as I look back on my life and I think about the way that I am and the skills that I have and the dreams that I dream, they seem to be written into me. And it all leads me to a place where I can't imagine that it's for nothing. And I also tend to think that maybe knowing for sure doesn't necessarily make us better. Like, it may make us feel better, but it doesn't grow trust in us. And trust feels so important. When I choose to trust another person, there may be signs and signals that that person is trustworthy, but ultimately it's an act of faith. They can still let me down, but I believe a life of trust is much more worth living than a life of distrust. Just a couple thoughts in response to that question. As always, connect with those who know you and love you and ask them what they think, and you may be surprised what they see and what they can help you with. Do you have an idea or a thought in response to this question? Send me an email and I'll share it on a future episode. And don't forget, you can ask me easy questions too. You can ask me lighthearted things and I can respond to those. Share an idea, share an image, share a story with us. It might be great for the whole. I'd love to hear from you more, so feel free to be in touch with me via email at loverenepodcast@gmail.com. That is loverenepodcast@gmail.com. loverenepodcast@gmail.com. Love to hear what you're thinking about in the beginning of this new year. As always, thank you so much for listening.